Hey, Diego.
Hello, episode
Good to see
two.
you. Episode
Good to
two,
see you.
the biggest
Right,
and best episode
the
is the one
biggest
that we're
episode
on.
ever.
I want to take a moment of silence because that's the focus of today's thing is change. A moment of silence for all the screenshots of the documentation that became outdated overnight.
All the PowerPoint slides that you were preparing the day before of a presentation, and you realized in that morning that button has changed.
Yeah. That's why demos are the king now, right? It's
Oh my
fine.
god!
That's just the circle of life with Microsoft 365. Screenshots fade, buttons move, and users still click the wrong thing.
But
So
okay, this is funny, right? So when I started in this journey of presenting at community events and all, there was always this joke about presenters preparing their slide decks the night before the presentation. Now I feel like more and more there is also the morning off check to ensure that the functionality that you're about to talk about the day is still there. That's a constant on every session that I'm in right now.
I
There are a lot
swear
of
this button was
presenters.
here yesterday.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. If you think your tenant changes fast, just remember Microsoft's naming conventions and logos seem to change faster. All right, so that's the focus of today. But before we dive into talking about keeping up with Microsoft 365 changes, what's one thing you wanted to make sure we share? Anything for Microsoft 365 tenant leaders that they should know about?
Okay, so for me, one that I find it very impactful is the knowledge agents in SharePoint. It's still in preview mode, like some people have really been taking advantage of it. To me, I joked this week that this was one of the biggest updates in SharePoint since flexible sections were included in
Yeah.
SharePoint pages. Knowledge agents is really having Copilot now overseeing all your content in SharePoint. But a lot of people were still unsure because this is still in preview mode. But there has been some changes and announcements this week, and the two big ones is that you can now enable that just for a handful of sites, like
Not the
start doing
whole
that right
tenant,
now,
but
right?
targeted, big for admin.
So you don't risk people using knowledge agent that they're not supposed to mess with on a
Yeah.
particular site. That's a big one. The most important one has to do with licensing, is the fact that knowledge agents has now been confirmed that whenever they go on general release, which is next year, they will also follow Copilot licensing. So as long as you have a license to Copilot, you can use knowledge agents. So please do that and start cleaning up your SharePoint mess.
Yeah, if you
That's
get
my
a Copilot license and all your site admins, you could be like, you get a knowledge agent, you get knowledge agent. I love it. AI teammates means that there's some important implications. I think governance and lifecycle now have to expand in every direction. I'll give an example. Let's say you manage SharePoint. You don't manage teams. You don't manage anything. You're just like a SharePoint person in the M365 space. Sure enough, when you're doing something simple like archiving, you can't just look at things like last active date. You need to think about the dependencies, not just of users using this site, but even agents now. Like what agents may have retrieved or used this site recently? What agents are currently accessing it in the last 60 days or 90 days? What agents were using resources from this site? These are things that can affect everything from lifecycle to your security management and other strategies. It's not just the people who work in Entra who now have to figure out
right.
managing these agents, but it's going to affect everyone in M365. Change is constant, but surprises should be optional, right? And if your users find out about a change before admins, that's not really innovation, that's a risk. And if you do not intentionally route changes to security, adoption, support, they route themselves. So we definitely know that in M365, there's so much change, we have to tackle it. We can't slow it down, but we can decide how that change lands in our tenants. What do you think of for those key tools and resources? What's their go-to way of addressing the rapid change of Microsoft 365 as an admin or someone behind the tenant?
So for me, it has never been a one-step approach because there are so many different angles that you can look at it. You get your message center updates and those get updated daily. Just be mindful that's just not enough, and just come in already prepared that looking just at admin center updates is just not enough for you. Why? Because there will be a ton of noise in there. If you go to the entire list, there is going to be things about changes in Viva colors and logos. There's nothing we can do about it. If Microsoft decides to change all the icons in M365, we're like, okay, cool. But there are a few things that you have to be aware. Some things will be turned on by default, and some other things will appear as an option, but will never be turned on. These are the more important things that you need to be mindful of, which are all the major changes. You're only looking at Admin Center. Then you also have Microsoft roadmap. Microsoft roadmap is more the bigger picture of things and what's coming down the road and all the features that get announced. For me, there is also a third angle to look at because you have Microsoft roadmap, you have the admin stuff, but you also have the roadmap that in your organization, your leadership wants to see. Because please don't try to print out the list of admin center updates or even guide your leadership to Microsoft's own roadmap. People are probably going to throw something at you if you do that to them. So what you need to do as an admin, given any time that you may have available, you need to blend in a little bit of each because language is not necessarily accessible to everyone. So my advice here is try to figure out what's comfortable because you have Microsoft roadmap, but you're going to have your organization's own roadmap. What are the main goals of your leadership? What are the things that you want to tackle? To me, that is just as important as the official roadmap updates and admin center.
I totally agree. I think there's a minimum of 3 levels, right? We've got the message center. Here's what to do and what you can do. The roadmap is what's coming. And neither of those is what you communicate to your org. You have this third layer, which is your digital center of excellence, your way of communicating that stuff. And I think all 3 of those are needed. And then around those, you have this constellation of blogs, tools, and podcasts like this. I think that's critical. So let's break that down a little bit. We talked about the message center itself, which is a great resource. If we were to dig into that a little bit more, we can talk through a few of the key best practices for it. If we think about the message center, a few things come to mind. The first one is if you treat it as a newsfeed, you get overwhelmed. So I agree with you. It's about treating it as a work queue. And so, your preferences, or you can say, okay, I want to see these specific things, your ability to filter, like I'm a SharePoint admin, I just care about SharePoint. Those things make a difference. And then when you've done that filtering, once you've figured out how to do it, you then need to action something. So you read it and say, look, this legacy content delivery or whatever it is, I read it, I understand it, I click through it, I understand what to do, what are we going to do to prepare. If I've done my actions, I can then archive this. And that's a big deal too, because now we're essentially archiving it. We don't need to worry about it. It's been marked. So I think treating it like an activity center, a work queue, I think that matters. There's a lot in here, not just the archiving, but a big one is sharing. So you can share the messages, the specific one that I'm clicked on. I can share a bulk set of them, or you can even set up things like preferences. You can even set up things like, okay, who are going to get the notifications from Message Center? And you can add other people to this listing, or what emails are you even going to get? Like all the major updates, weekly digest for the services that I select, right? And then you pick the services. These are different things you can do. You don't have to be in the admin center to start to process this, but you need to figure out a way to triage and work through these lists.
So 2 things. The first one is, can you please open one of these message center updates?
Sure.
Which I think is very valuable, the fact that now you have a summary at the very top. So that's in plain English, what really you need to know. But if you scroll to the very bottom of that, you actually have a question, and I just noticed that before. That's why I just asked you to open that. Do you like this change? No, I don't. I'm resistant to change. Don't change anything. No, just kidding. But you actually have a feedback button. I had never noticed that.
That's life. Yeah, absolutely. But it does have a structure to it, to your point. When is this? Is there a due date? What do we need to consider? How do we make changes? If you're an M365 admin, especially if this is your workload, you know what Exchange is, then these are going to make sense to you, and they're pretty straightforward to read and understand. The bigger question is, how do you orchestrate it? I know you're a big fan of using the Planner Sync too. Yes. Maybe you could talk a little bit about best practices there.
The first thing you need to know is that you are able to create one planner sync for your admin center once a day, or whatever schedule you choose later through Power Automate. You can export all the messages in Admin Center to a Microsoft Planner plan. So let's dissect that a little bit. First, do you want to sync all the updates to Planner or only major updates? That's the first choice you have to make. A lot of these things are noise. Sometimes you might not want to add the stay informed ones. Sometimes you may just want to focus on the prevent fix issues. Choose what level of changes you want in there. But the next step is look at the list of items included. There are basically every single product in Microsoft 365 included in there. So you can uncheck some of the boxes if you don't want some of them appearing in your planner. However, this is my own experience, okay? I learned that that is based on the tags added to each update. And because this is maintained by humans, sometimes if you unselect something that's related to, let's say, OneDrive, a major SharePoint update might pass through, might not be tagged that,
Yeah.
or you might end up missing things. I like having everything. Other people might disagree with me, but I like, just for my own sanity, I like having everything, just because that way I rather dismiss items that I'm not worried about than end up missing something major to my tenant that I just missed because I didn't check some of the categories or the products or services that are included in them.
Yeah, you could definitely
But
change this, which is important. You might start with stay informed, and then you start to get a feel for what those messages are as you're triaging your way through them, and then be like, you know what, let's just remove that category. We'll use emails or other techniques for it. The planner one has a few other things too. Let's say you choose when to import, because I'm just configuring it here. We can choose from this date to start to set it up, which is a big deal. That makes a big difference because I might want to start fresh. We have a new way of managing M365. We haven't been doing it the way we want to. So now we're going to orchestrate that using Planner. And so we're going to just start from today. The other idea is you grab what was the last 7 days of changes, right? And then I think the other thing is once you've configured all this, it is a Power Automate flow that you're establishing. You set up this syncing schedule and create a flow with Power Automate. It's a straightforward process when you're signed in. If you've ever used Power Automate before, you're just making sure that your Message Center account is set up and you create the flow. However, this flow is being created based on me being logged in. One of the things I always recommend people do, if you're going to use that planner and you're setting up a new process and you're confident you're going to use it, then go and change that flow to make sure it runs as a service account so that if I leave or whoever set it up leaves, you're not going to lose that. So that's, I think, a really good gotcha that does catch you. And then when it's in Planner, it is kind of a dump, right? As you can see here, it's just dumping all of the features. It does have attachments. It looks like this one doesn't have an attachment, but it does include attachments. Here you can see there's 2 attachments and images. It's really just a way to coordinate. So you're going to have to establish your own labels. You're going to have to create your own buckets like, okay, let's make this assigned. Don't worry about this one, not relevant or something. You're making some determination and then you move it into another category. You create some labels where it's like, this is really urgent. So you're going to establish your own process, and all this engine is going to do is dump them into this one column for you so you can parse it out. The advantage there is anyone could have access to this planner. That's really helpful. Or I could use Power Automate to take pieces of this planner based on, oh, I set this label, this thing happens, and then it ports it over into this other planner, which is for the SharePoint. So there's quite a bit that organizations can do without getting into pure API. Of course, this whole thing has an API you can leverage. It's nice that Microsoft's built some of those pieces for you to get started on your own management.
So a little bit following up with my own experience on this. First one is make sure that if you're using a service account to sync those messages, that service account has at least global reader permissions on your tenant. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to read anything from Admin Center. That's going to be one point of failure that you're likely going to hit. The second one is the Power Automate flow that will be created is a very simple one that runs by default once a day, and it has that sync tasks action. However, in my experience, I have always gone one step further. We're not going to cover that in today's episode, but what I always recommend people doing is if you have a different system that you use for task management, for your internal IT task management, say Jira, Azure DevOps, you can also add actions in that Power Automate flow to further process these messages. You can now use Copilot in your Power Automate flows to process that text. Another thing that I like doing, if you have several teams throughout your organization, you can also at least give an initial tagging to each of these posts. So if you have your Exchange team and one of the tasks is Microsoft Exchange, you can go ahead and assign that to those people. You might lose a few friends along the way.
No, better. I agree. Everything has to be owned by someone. So that person can say, oh, it doesn't matter, whatever, where you got it. But I agree. Assignment is one of the key elements to this. And I think one other way to think about this too is we talked about extending it, all these things you could do. Like there's a whole ecosystem of products. I'll just name some because I can't remember all their names. So there's like Change Pilot. Delta Pulse, Change Management M365, Cloud Scout One. There's a number of these vendors that have tools that allow you to explore the message center, set up your own alerts, do some of that. So if you don't want to do what we're describing, like some of this work, there's definitely both free and paid tools that give you a way to analyze like these updates and then take appropriate action involving different people, et cetera. It also brings up this idea of community is really powerful. So Michael Blumenthal has this amazing maturity model that he's described, and it's a great resource. We'll link it in the description for this one. But you can sort of see that this idea of change management or service management and how the message center could evolve from different stages. Mm-hmm. So initially it would just be like, hey, are we taking about new features? Are we taking advantage of the fact we can use that as something that's going to drive success within the organizations we work with? Are we at a different level where we're meeting regularly and we're discussing them? And so as you make your way through these layers, you can see that some of these could be daunting. Like maybe the planner sync is a higher tier. It's a level 4. It's highly managed. And so you just want to start with the more basic things of like, we're just aware. We're just working through the message center. I think you're in a pretty good place. Go ahead.
Don't let things accumulate, because if you're just checking this once every couple of days, once a week, it's manageable. If you go on vacation and no one is checking for all these changes, when you get back, you're going to be overwhelmed already. The fact that, let's be honest, we don't know everything, right? Big surprise. A lot of times you might see something that you might not think it's that relevant, or maybe Microsoft might post that as not a major change. That could be a major change to your organization. Let's go back to changing Microsoft 365 icons, right? Okay, not a big deal. It's just a cosmetic change. But say you have thousands of documents of tutorials internal that are linked to these icons and you want to make sure they are up to date. Well, an icon change is a big one. Yeah. So make sure major updates, also take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. But the other thing that you were also saying about the services that you have and about the additional websites, a lot of people, I know this show is about admins and about working on a tenant, but sometimes you want to share something with someone in your organization that does not have an admin account. So these sites, these folks that are tracking these on their own and creating these additional services, there is actually a very big use for them, because you don't want to give global reader to everyone in your organization, right? So pointing to one of these sites will also come very handy.
If you're looking for a great way to get started, I would say take the 3 to 5 most important changes, which to your point could be different for your org versus another org, right? So what are your 3 to 5 important changes? Then publish a short post in your COE. So you have a digital center of excellence or whatever. In there, you talk about what changed, who it impacts, when it's going to land, what we recommend you do, why it's an opportunity. So you make it into a very positive thing. And then use Copilot, because Copilot's amazing, to layer drafts. So you have a team announcement. You're going to push it onto multiple teams. You've got, a paragraph. Hey, how does this relate to X? Like some theme, like we're all about saving times in meetings. That's really what's trending right now in the orgs. So how does this correlate to saving times in meetings? How does it correlate to this other idea? Copilot's really good at guessing and figuring out how to map those ideas, or even rewriting it. Like one big one that I see a lot is you take those 3 to 5 announcements and then rewriting them for, okay, this is what like frontline workers in our organization who are teams on mobile and how they would interpret this. And here's how it would work for those who are managers. So there's very different audiences that you have in your organization. Between these messages and a little bit of Copilot, you can actually get this really nice broadcasting communication rhythm and take advantage of it. And one of my favorite stories about this is there's this, we'll call him Michael because he still doesn't feel comfortable with me sharing his name. He's amazing. He has this really successful technique where he takes security training and connects it to Microsoft changes. Think of the message center changes that relate to security. So he gets those notifications because he's not like the tenant manager. He's just like leading a lot of that. And when he gets those, he uses them as opportunities to drive interest. So as an example, what he'll do is he'll take a collaboration made simple framing, because that's the kind of training he does. And it's security training. It's just not represented as security. He never calls it security. It's much more successful this way. There was a change recently that changed the way the share dialogue works. It's really cool. So there's some really neat improvements with the share dialogue where you can name links and you can have these defaults. It remembers your settings and preferences and all sorts of cool stuff like that. So what he does is collaboration made simple or easier. And then during that, he talks about other things that have also changed, teams, this, like all these experiences. And then part of that is, hey, here's the share dialogue. And he talks about like really security best practices, but in a framing that matters to end users, that makes sense. And it's funny, that little framing of it changes the voluntary attendance rates for these trainings. He gets 94% on many trainings, voluntary attendance, compared to the other training that they do, like security related training. He's 180% or something attendance rate. He's even taken that data and correlated against, because it's just a heartbeat motion where you're doing this type of training. People demand it. And because they're delivering it all the time, it keeps giving them opportunities to teach people things that make everything from permissions to sharing to the security risks easier. And that reduces support tickets. So they see this cohort that's trained gets like a 40% reduction in security access tickets, things like that. And these are notable things versus the other, broader organization and cohort and community. So you can use the messaging as an opportunity to really leverage more benefit in your organization. And obviously I picked on security as an example there, but really could be any kind of adjustment that you're trying to drive in the organization.
And the other thing I'm going to add to this is that this is just a reminder for everyone working on this. It's now a shared responsibility. We're no longer maintaining a server that's in a room and only the admins have access to it. There's so much more now because you have leadership that's involved. You got your communications department in your organization. So sometimes some of these communications might need to go through them. You have end users. So there's so many people that are impacted by these changes. On the admin side, not one admin will ever be responsible or knowledgeable enough to know about everything that's coming up. Some of these updates are related to Windows operating systems. Know nothing about Windows. So my point here is you will need to engage with other admins in your organization on the Azure side, on the collaboration side, Power Platform, you name it. Because they will also have some input or some say in that. And if everyone is sharing the responsibility of monitoring these tasks, whether it's in Blender, Jira, Azure, or even Admin Center itself, it'll make everyone's lives a lot easier.
Yeah. The more you can internalize it, whether it's meetings, the message center, even the roadmap, like we didn't really talk about the roadmap, but like RSS, like the roadmap, the Microsoft 365 roadmap has an RSS feed. So, you can go to let me just load it up, for anyone who's not aware of it. So you can go to the Microsoft 365 roadmap and there's a lot of really cool stuff in it. One of the big ones that I really like is this little download button, which allows you to download it as a CSV. Really helpful if you want to correlate things. And then this RSS one, and you can feed it into Power Automate or whatever you want, right? I think when you internalize those things and bring them into your environment, there's a lot you can do. Think of events, that training was one type of event, but there's other kinds too. You and I are people who read the community blogs, that we're always trying to catch up on everything. And there's a lot of people where you need a little event like that. Maybe it's just twice a year, all this messaging you're doing, but like having like hey, what's changed? What's new? What's happened in your Microsoft 365 environment? And really just talking about the change. A lot of the cool new, and make it very positive, new things that people should get excited about. A lot of times that can create a lot more attention. Your little posts have built up to that, right? So now when people go to that, they're like, oh, well, there's this whole internal center of excellence where you're messaging this stuff. I didn't know I could do this anymore. Industry events can work the same way for those who are in the space, like your M365, you go to a community days or Ignite conference or things like that. But one thing about events is they're a catalyst, so they get people around it and they're immersive. One of the tricks with all of this is we're immersed. Like there's no one who's probably watching this who's not like, hey, all the message center stuff at least applies to my workloads I am keen on understanding. But most people in the org, this isn't like what they care about. So they're not going to be immersed, but in an event, they like whether it's training or things, they can get immersed in it. And that is just a very different experience and shouldn't be underestimated, especially in the AI era where everything feels kind of surface level.
So two things I would like to add. One thing is that you mentioned Copilot earlier. I think Copilot is becoming more and more crucial on weeding out what's important, on generating different flavors of a particular update for yours. Like, hey, frame this for my leadership, frame this for the end user. That thing is great. The other thing is a little bit of an audience question. If anyone watching this has any examples or ideas of how they do this differently in their organization, please post that in the comments because I would love to hear about that. Every person that I talk to who's an M365 admin, they do it in a similar way, but they always have their own flavor, their own different way that they do things. I love hearing that from people because that's how we learn from each other, right? So if you got some of your ideas, experiences, please post below.
Yeah. Do you use the org messages to do some of those? We used to have those like, hey, there's an outage, but it's not an outage. It's like an M365 change. If it's a big one, do you put that in your org messages, or is org messages just like corporate comms? These are things that would be really great to hear people's perspective on. So I know we've covered a lot today. There's so much to change to manage, and we definitely struggled to fit it all in. Anything you want to leave our wonderful viewers with?
Looking forward to it next week. I think there's going to be a ton of cool stuff. I wonder if they're going to be talking about Copilot, but really looking forward to that and seeing the implications and the things that we're going to have to turn on or turn off after next week.
Yeah, so we didn't talk about Copilot that much. I think there's probably, I'll look at the transcript like maybe 12 times we mentioned it. Amazing. Well, as our second video, if you haven't watched the first, make sure you click on that and like, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. Thanks so much for your time and attention.
Thank you, Richard. Till next time.
Take care, everyone.
All right.